around. All right, so I'll just start with a brief introduction about myself. So Shadab, Rashid, as it clearly states. Most people just call me Rashid just because it's easier, and obviously I had to start that trend. I've been in RIM with quite a few teams. Most recently, I've joined developer relations, where I'm acting as an application development consultant. I provide consultation to other multimedia companies or application vendors who are making multimedia apps for BlackBerry 10. Prior to this, I was primarily a software developer working on prototype products, prototype apps, coming up with product features, and actually hacking stuff together. It's great to have you all here, even though it's at the end of the day. I'm pretty sure everyone's tired, and we all know the keynote started way too early. And yeah, it's great to have all these good developers all at the same time. It's amazing that I'm getting to talk to you, so it's awesome. All right, so instead of going on and on about myself, let's start this session. What's going on? Is it not? Yeah. Oh, no, no. So the clicker, should I just use my laptop? Yeah, you know what? I'll just trust my laptop on this. All right, so what might have brought you here? So I tried to, so basically just like the session description, I tried to cater to what most people are interested in, basically making multimedia applications for consuming audio or video in some form or the other. Also, it's not just for like some of the components like the DRM, digital rights management components, or the compatible platform. You might be dealing with some content providers or studios whom you're developing for, or you might trying to do business with them. So some of the parts might be relevant to that. So I did mention a little bit about myself. I do try to get a sense of the audience so that I don't keep on grinding on the things over and over, which you might be too familiar with. So just by a show of hands, how many of you have already started developing for BlackBerry 10? All right. Assuming that it's all native? OK, so almost everyone's familiar with Qt, Cascades, QML, everything. Awesome. So, OK, that's good. And is everyone familiar with like the Media Player API or Multimedia API or MMRender? OK. All right, so, all right. That's why you're here. OK, that's awesome. OK, so what we will cover today, basically in a nutshell, the core capabilities of the API, the overview and the usage, C++, Qt, QML, the formats and the streaming protocols. If you're working with content providers, how do you provide their content, and some sample applications and code. Obviously, it's not going to be as fancy as the keynote demos that you may have seen. Well, I'm having a hard time switching slides, so you can imagine. But it will be sample code which are more relevant to developers. A lot of them, or most of them, would be available to you later on. And you can dive into them. You can break them apart and start coding away. OK. Right. So let's dig right in. An API overview. So in a nutshell, I'll cover, by the way, I might be going fast because there are quite a few slides. And I'm not sure I'll have enough time for questions and answers, or how much time I'll have at the end of the session. But after the session, all the speakers are going to be at the Ask the Experts hall, like basically the meals hall. So I'll be there for 1 hour, so anyone can come in and ask whatever. Right, so in a nutshell, I'll try to do a dry run of all the core API capabilities. And we'll dig, so this is covering both C and Qt all together. It's all mashed together. So using one API or the other, you should be able to do these functions. All right, so the basic audio-video playback. You're trying to play an audio, you're trying to play a video file, a stream, a local file, or a resource somewhere in the network. For video players, you can obviously use a screen component. In Cascades, we have this control called foreign window control. It used to be called slightly different before, which basically makes a hole in the Cascades user interface, which lets you do the playback. And obviously, you have the controls that you need for any media player objects or media player applications, the buttons, the progress sliders, whatnot. You can also control the playlist. So you can attach M3U file, and through API, you can go next track or previous track. I believe you can also do transitions without, so you can make the next track load and buffer ahead of time so that there's no delay. I believe, yeah. You can do a few of those things as well. And when you do playback, a lot of the times you might already know the item you're trying to play. Say if you're already playing from your media library, your database already knows which artist, which album, but sometimes you may not. So the platform multimedia API actually allows you to figure some of that out. Artist info, album info, and how long the duration is of the media file or the stream, and at which position of the playback you're currently at, things like that. Audio video routing. So we do have a new API called Audio Manager. We'll briefly mention that even later on. It lets you specifically control where the audio goes to. So if you have multiple audio devices connected, you can programmatically define, okay, make my audio go always to this device and not this one. You can also detect whenever a second screen is connected. We'll briefly mention some of that later. Volume control, well, of course, you've got to be able to control the volume. There are device buttons, exactly like in the playbook, which allows you to control whatever media playback is happening on the platform right now. So you can control that with the button, so you don't even have to do anything, but you can control it through the API as well. So if you intentionally want to mute something or control the volume, you can have a progress slider or buttons inside application. The API is there. The now playing area. So those of you who are familiar with the playbook, there is an area in the system tray where the core media player, whenever it's playing something, you can see what's going on. There are API to access some of that information, what's being played. You can even set information there. And with some of the API, you can actually control, or you can try to control the most active media player on the system right now. You can set the metadata, artist, album, etc. And some of the things that you may have noticed in the keynote, we do have a card solution. This is part of the invocation framework. And I'm not going to get into too much details now because I'll cover it a little bit more later on. But basically, you can just invoke the core media previewer. So you don't even have to make a media player app if you don't want to. So you can just leverage the core media previewer, which is already there. There are some limitations. There are some strengths. We can get into that later again. Also, if you're making a media player app, you can register to be a previewer as well, so that other applications can invoke you. So the users don't have to be restricted to just one core media player app. They can choose to use other ones. Okay. You all probably saw this picture. These are some of the core components, the technologies that we support in the BlackBerry 10 platform. I wanted to put this in because whenever we talk about the native SDK, essentially we're talking about all of this. At the bottom layer, we have the BlackBerry 10 operating system, which is basically QNX. It's powered by QNX, and that's the kernel level. It's taking care of all the memory management. It's very fast, efficient. And on top of that, we have an application framework, which is a combination of the Qt API and the Cascades UI framework. Qt API is user-friendly. These are wrapper classes. So using C, it may not be that easy for a lot of developers, and it could get dirty. It could get messy. And it just makes a really nice experience leveraging the Qt core, the signals, and the event loop, and using the UI components from BlackBerry Cascades. Now, when we refer to the multimedia API for native SDK, at the C level, we have MMRender. That's pretty much the process in QNX which controls the rendering for audio and video playback. There are some other classes for QASA, which is the QNX audio sound architecture, but that's for low-level audio processing. So for VoIP application, you can use some of that this session, we're not going to get into too much details for that. But just a heads up, there is another component, QASA, QNX Audio Sound Architecture. A lot of VoIP partners, they use that because you can control sound at the PCM level, things like that. But for typical audio video playback, QNX is providing render. That's for controlling the playback. And for a lot of the event management, how to figure out, okay, what is being played right now? What position am I playing? Basically, controlling the events, you could do through BlackBerry platform services. That's the easiest way in the C level to process the events. There are a few other ways. We'll mention that in a bit. And on the top layer, we have wrapper classes. Basically, these are application developer-friendly classes. These are just wrapping the functionalities which are present in the underlying layer. These are basically render functionalities, but it's just very easy to use with BlackBerry Cascades UI components or just in C++ Qt QML way. Okay, now let's look at some stuff for the QML and Qt APIs. Well, C++. These are some of the core classes. So if you're thinking of looking into the header file, these would be the header files. These were exposed with the beta 2 or R6, if you know some of those terminologies. It's still here, like with R9 obviously is there. Media player is what you want to use to just control playback. It's very easy to use. We'll see in a bit, both in C++ or QML. Now playing connection is what I was referring earlier about the system tray area, or trying to control what the active media player object right now is. Audio recorder is a very simplified recording class which lets you record from the microphone. System sound is basically if you want to play the ping noise or the noise that your app makes when an email arrives, if you want to make use of some of that. And there are some other classes. Basically, those are the enum classes that you use to make use of these classes, enum types. Now, let's actually see some code. We'll look at a simple app, which is just a play pause functionality. And we'll look at it with both in the C++ layer and the QML layer. Let's start with just from the QML layer. All right. So when you make a new project, a BlackBerry Cascades project, it makes a main QML file for you. And it basically makes this structure page container. After that, I just added a button here. This is the button I'm going to be using to control the playback. And this is where I'm actually doing the playback. So on the event, whenever there's a clicked event, if it's not playing already, I just play it. It's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. This is embedded JavaScript within QML. I'm sure most of you already know. And for actually instantiating the media player, it's actually it's an attached object. So you instantiate a media player, you define the variable. That's the ID that I use to refer to it. And it's as simple as attaching the input. For local or remote playback, it's both the same. You just have to, so for remote playback, it would be something like HTTP:// and it works exactly the same way. Well, for remote URI, it might take a little bit longer, depending on your connection or what you're trying to play, but it's the exact same thing. That's how an API should work. You just pass in the input, and it works just like that. A little heads up, though. Right now, if you're trying to play something on the local machine, say on your BlackBerry 10 device, you do have to pass in the absolute path. So right now, it's limited that if you just pass in, I kept a video file in the assets folder. Why not just do assets /, or why can't it just figure out from the relative path of the program? There were some dependencies in the platform for which that feature is not available yet. So if you are trying to play something, you might have to just make one C++ call just to figure out the absolute path. Now in the future, it will get better, maybe even by the next release. And so you attach the media player. Well, you instantiate the media player, and this is an event signal that comes up. So this is a signal that comes up whenever the state changes. And if it started, I'm just changing the text of the button and changing my local variable. I'm just using that to track the state. And that's it. All this application does is just switches between play and pause and actually plays a media file, an MP3 file. And now let's look at the C++ equivalent for that. So we have this header file, and we have this CPP file. In the constructor, I'm making a new button. I'm setting the text. I don't know why I said the alignment. It's not like I'm trying to make it pretty, but and all I did is just I connected the signal with a function that I'll be using to actually handle the state. So this is just for the button. This is for the button. So whenever the button gets clicked, I'm assigning the function which will the slot where I'll be handling the event, or handling the signal. And then I create a media player. Just like this, just the same way as I used in QML, I set the source, which is the same, just a URL, and then I connect the same signal I was listening on, and I mention the slot where I'm going to be handling it. So if you go down where I actually define the functions, this is the slot I defined to actually handle the button clicked signal. I'm just changing, I'm just using this to toggle the playback, either switch between play or pause. And this is where I'm just handling the media state. It's very straightforward. If you were using the C API, you'd essentially have to come up with your own wrapper classes, or maybe you don't need to. And in C API, there are quite a few steps that you'd have to do even a simple playback. These wrapper classes, the Q wrapper classes C++ way, it allows you to skip all of that. You don't have to know all of those steps. All right.
I had a question.
Sure.
So let's say you want to choose something out of your file system instead of a hard-coded file.
Okay. Oh, right. That's the other thing. I should have shown that as well. Now, if you look into all the Cascades applications in the bar descriptor XML file, excuse me, there's a set of permissions that you can set. The media file I was trying to play from that application happens to be a shared file. And that's the only place where you can play the media files from. In BlackBerry 10, same as Playbook, applications are sandboxed. So you have access to the shared folders, and that's about it. You can pick into another app space, or there are only certain folders in the file system where you can.
Can you play from your own sandbox?
Yes, definitely, right. So, but for that, again, you can specify, like I said, there's a limitation right now in the media player set source URI function that if you just specify relative to your own app, it won't figure it out. So you
still get the absolute path to your
right.
sandbox easily.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just want to download a temporary file to play.
Absolutely, yeah. That's all in your own sandbox. You're the boss, so you can do whatever. I'm just saying, like, ideally, this URL, like this function, it should be smart enough to figure out the absolute path. But right now, you just have to do a small hack. Just make one C++ call, and that's it, right? And so over here, the shared files access specifier, it lets you access to everything under shared. So shared music, shared videos, shared pictures. And if you're trying to do streaming, there's also an internet access specifier. Also, like for actually using the media player classes, you actually have to specify this library. So you actually have to specify a libs variable and specify -lbb multimedia. These things should be documented in the release notes or the overview guide. Even if it's not documented in the particular header file API documentation, it should be documented in the release notes. And yeah, that should be the gist of it. I'll try to rush through. Excuse me. All right, that was too late. Okay. So again, just a code recall. This is the media player instantiation we just looked at. You define the ID, you handle the events, and that's basically where you set the URL. And that's just the button through which I was controlling the playback, toggling between play pause. And this is the equivalent C++ and Qt code. Instantiate the media player, set the source, and that's where you connect the signal to the function where you're going to handle the slot where you're going to handle the media state change signal. And that's how the event was being handled. That's from a different app, but it's the same functionality. You toggle for the button, you're toggling between play pause, and for the media state change, play state changed, you're changing whatever you want to. Okay, now you can actually instantiate several media player objects and play multiple media files or streams at the same time. There are some media player applications where this might be needed. The easiest thing I could think of is just a simple audio effects, simple app which uses some trivial audio effects. I'll try to show off something. To the HDMI, please. Now, this app is just a test app we made. It's just using QML, and we instantiated like a bunch of media player, like the same way in QML we saw. Is the volume on? That's fine, yeah. For those who are not fond of rock music, but okay, so laptop, please. Right. So the Render platform, I believe it even supports up to 64 different contexts being played at the same time. So I don't know why you would need it, but in case if you need it, there are you can open up several media player instantiations and play things at the same time. Right, again, too late. All right, now video playback. As I mentioned, there is a control called foreign window control. It's as simple as attaching the window to the media player. We'll see soon. It's very easy to scale, resize, reposition, and it performs very well. I'll show you in the sample app again. But essentially, this is the screen window component. If you're familiar with how the QNX or the Playbook C API worked, the foreign window control just makes it much easier to handle. For simple things, it's very trivial. The documentation on the header files might be just enough. But if you're actually doing a lot of manipulations, I would suggest reading up on the documentation, because the screen window component, it's not very simple. It's not a very simple concept to get. It has deep hooks to the platform. So if you are doing something crazy, I would refer to the docs and actually try to understand well. But for simple audio video playback, it's very easy. Can I go to the HDMI again? Again, so my next slide was supposed to tell me what this is, but again, I moved to the HDMI way too fast. It's just a simple video playback. You can't really see the scroll bar at the bottom. Is there any way you can move it up a little bit?
No.
You can't? Oh, that's too much. That's too much.
I don't see like it's clipped.
Yeah. All right. Never mind. All right. You just have to, take my word for it. I'm not lying. So this sample app is already public, but I'll stop talking and just play it. So it's using a foreign window. It uses panning. So I'm just touching it and redrawing it, and I'm resizing it. Play pause. It uses some slight animations in the play pause button. Can you see the blue thing on the bottom? Yeah, a little bit, yeah. And it does use orientation handling event. Yeah, there you go. Duh. So the sample app even shows how to, you're fetching the events, and you can see the milliseconds, the time elapsed, and time remaining. All right, enough.
So the time elapsed remaining, is that like optional or something?
Well, like if you're doing playback, you probably wanna figure out where your playback is right now, and through the Media Player API, you can get that back.
Can you customize the controls, placement, whatever?
Yeah, so like that was just a text label I used to get the events back and just draw it on the UI. And yeah, so this sample code is actually public. It has been public since beta 2. Now it won't, like, because there has been some API changes with beta 3, it won't compile right away. There are a lot of things that you might have to modify. But I'll probably modify myself and try to upload it in a few weeks if possible. But the sample app is there. So as I mentioned, as you saw, there are quite a few things. Again, too late for that. There are quite a few things you could make use of. You can move the foreign window around. You can resize it. You can scale it. It shows you how to do the orientation handling. It shows you how to get the play pause events back. It also shows you how to get the metadata back, for example, the duration and the current position. Okay. All right, so essentially, if you're just trying to if you're just trying to make a simple window to do playback, that's how it's going to look. You just you just instantiate a foreign window control. You name it something so that you can refer to it from the media player object. And these are some of the properties that you mentioned so that it automatically figures out what to listen on, the size, the position. These are the things which are actually documented in the header files, so you can actually look into it. And it becomes visible when it's actually bound to a window and it starts playback. So again, these are some of the small things you might have to worry about when you're actually doing the playback. And I just defined it here. This is a different app, by the way. I simplified it just so that it's easier to read and understand. Again, that's just the ID that I'll be using in the next slide. Now, it's the same way I was instantiating a media player object before. Instead, I just assign where the video output is and the window ID is. So that's the window that I've already created from the foreign window control. That's what I'm referring to. Right. Now, Multimedia API, the C API. Well, I'll just do a quick run of how the render actually works. I won't get into too much details because there are sample apps bundled with the SDK IDE, which actually shows these steps. There's one called video playback, and there was one audio playback, which actually use a C API render to make use of render. So in essence, you have to make the window. So instead of foreign window control, if you're just limited to C, you'll have to make use of the screen.h header file. Actually have to make a screen window. You have to set the properties properly. It is somewhat trickier, and that's why the sample apps are there, so that developers can follow the steps to the T. But ideally, you have to set up the window, start the playback, and then handle events through BPS or otherwise. We'll get to that soon. And there are a couple of steps that you have to follow. You have to set the audio output. You have to set the video output. You have to attach the media URI and play. So again, it is a little bit of extra work, but you might still need the C API if you're doing a lot of low-level processing anyway, and then expose the events to the UI. We'll get to that again in a bit. And this is just if you just take a glance, these are basically the 4 things that I mentioned. You have to set up first you have to create the context. You have to connect, you have to create the context, you have to set the audio output and video output, and then you have to set the actual source URI and then play. So it is a little bit of work. Again, the sample apps do come bundled with the SDK, so it's not like you have to memorize it for an exam. And the event handling. Oh, before I go into more of this, I just wanted to quickly mention, so there are like 2 specific paths for developers on BlackBerry 10. For app developers, the suggested API is right now and going forward, it's basically Qt, C++, QML, because it works nicely with the BlackBerry 10 like BlackBerry 10 OS, the UI components, controls, and the developers won't really have to dig too deep in the OS level or the C API level. The BlackBerry platform services, it's often used by game developers because they don't really need to link Cascades overhead or Qt overheads in their game projects, because they don't really need to make use of the Qt or the Cascades UI control objects or the look and feel. They often use OpenGL or other gaming engines or drawing libraries. But because it's a new platform, a lot of the APIs weren't present. A lot of app developers were still forced to use the C API or the BlackBerry platform services to listen to events or do a lot of things. But as of now, most of the features should be exposed in Qt level anyway. But maybe some are still not. Maybe some are still in the queue. So maybe you might have to reach out to BlackBerry platform services. But ideally, you shouldn't really have to unless you really need to. The way it works, you make an event loop, and you actually request for different events. So for example, over here, it's probably too small to see. It's looking for the navigator event. So this is actually similar to what was done in Playbook. The API has been the same almost, but more functionalities were added. You can listen to navigator event. It's like, OK, I got to swipe up. And then what do you have to do? Similarly, you can start requesting events for render. OK, whenever there's a state change, let me know. And you can request for network status, error, buffer state, position. So for C API, that's how you'd have to do it. Now, just a quick dry run. These are some of the new things that came out again with Beta 2 or R6. render was there. That's how you would initialize context and actually start the playback, the 4 steps that I showed before. BPS render, it lets you monitor a specific context. So you create a context, and in another thread, you said, OK, for this context, let me know whenever there's a change in state so that I can monitor it. The media controller and the media player H, these two combined, it lets you do the functionalities that I mentioned with the now playing service before. Controlling the active media player object in the platform and the now playing tray area on the top in the system tray. All right, so like I said, sometimes you might still have to use the BPS API. So this is how it will look like if you're using BPS API and you're still trying to use QML and Cascades. So on the top, you have QML, and the signals come from the bottom wrapper classes to actually draw things on the UI. So in my sample app, if you had to do it in BPS, you'd be getting my position changed event from the C API, and you would have to wrap them up. You have to emit a Qt signal, and then it would come up all the way to QML, and then you have to draw things or change things. A lot of the sample apps out there are using this kind of method, this kind of technique. So don't get overwhelmed that you have to learn so many of the new things. There are lots of sample apps out there. So if you're doing this approach and you're trying to control the media, like multimedia API, so again, so from a button event from the QML layer, it'll trickle down and it'll invoke a C or C API call, basically calling render. That's how it do most of the control, like play, pause, stop, and seek. If you're using a progress bar, you seek to a position. And then from the BPS events, you get what's going on. So the status, position, and then again, like I mentioned, you have to wrap them up, emit a Qt signal, and that's how you update the QML. Again, there are enough sample apps out there in the BlackBerry GitHub repositories, as well as some in bundle with the SDK. And all these slides would be available to you, so you don't have to worry about remembering them. You can look at probably recorded with my voice as well. So you should be able to get hold of this. Now, audio routing, as I mentioned, it's new. Right now, it's only exposed in the C API level. Eventually, it will be exposed in Qt API as well as QML. And a lot of the C API, eventually there will be C++ classes, so that if you're just interested in being able to use it nicely, and instead of actually being forced to use Qt or QML, you could do that. But again, that's later on in the roadmap. So basically over here, you can, like I mentioned, you can direct sounds to other devices. By default, there are some functionalities defined. So if I have an auxiliary input connected to my BlackBerry 10, it'll go to whatever the output is. But there might be some cases where you want to specifically control that I always want this to go through this device and not that device if both of them are connected. There are a couple of devices that you can actually detect here. And there is functionality, not through Audio Manager API, but through BPS. Whenever there's a new audio device connected, you can listen. Okay, yeah, I now have another option to produce output to. Okay, now apps which are heavy with audio effects. Render is typically for playback, for if you're listening to music or like watching videos or watching clips. Not necessarily for apps which are heavy with a lot of audio mixing. For those, a lot of those application developers probably use their own audio libraries or audio management software anyway. But you also have, in our platform, I'll just quickly mention this, you also do have OpenAL. It comes bundled with the SDK. So you don't have to port it over. You just have to include a library in the .pro file and just include a header file. It's ideal for game developers or people who are trying to do, again, this is just for audio. People who are trying to do cross-platform solutions, you can make use of that. It's already ported. And the IDE also has a sample app. So it is not as simple as just what I showed in the C++ layer, just make a media player object do playback. It is a lot more code, but it is also much stronger. So for game developers, I believe they can select which direction the sound is coming from. And there are a lot more functionalities that you can make use of. And yeah, as I said, there is a sample app that comes bundled. Now, is there anyone who doesn't know that person's face in that image? No one knows? All right, I guess I'll have to show it. What? No, it's not.
Wasn't it one of the Cascades developers that they ended up here too?
Yes. So yeah, you got it. So can I please get it to HDMI again? So this is just the OpenAL sample app that the SDK comes bundled with. All it does, it does some image manipulation and uses OpenAL.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you.
So that's all it does. And apparently the eyes of the character is actually, laptop please. The eyes of the character is actually one of the guys from TAT. They had to edit the pictures because of copyright reasons or whatnot. All right. So again, it comes bundled. So if you want to look into how it works, it is a little bit, just for doing that simple audio playback, there is a bit of you do have to write some code for it, do the setup. And it's essentially more than what you would have to do even in the C API for render. So it is a little bit more code. All right. Now, formats, streaming protocols, DRM. Let's start with formats. The BlackBerry 10 platform, it's pretty much comparable to the industry standard, if not more. Most of the relevant or the most important formats or file containers should be there. If by any chance there isn't, you might have to use some other libraries to actually do the conversion before playing. Again, MKV is there, MP4, MPEG-4. Most of the important ones are there. You should be covered. I put the image in just because that's where the document I got it from. It has nothing to do with this session. OK, and codecs. Yeah, so it also has AAC. For the codecs, we also have AC3. It's new with the BlackBerry 10. Basically, that's Dolby Digital Plus, so if you have devices connected, you can try to make use of that. You have H.263, H.264, MPEG-2, MPEG-4. Most of the leading content providers use one of those, so you should be covered. FLAC is new, I believe. Vorbis is supported. So again, these are documented in the public websites, developer.blackberry.com. You might have to dig in a little bit more. And these are some of the recommended formats for the local. Choose MP4, codec H.264. Basically, whatever playbook supported, BlackBerry 10 will support at least that much and more. Okay. Now, streaming protocols. The HTTP, HTTPS, HTTP progressive download, they're all supported in Playbook. RTSP and HTTP live streaming is new with BlackBerry 10. Wherever it's possible, we recommend you use HTTP live streaming as opposed to RTSP. But a lot of content providers, for example, in Europe region or Asia Pacific, they might still be using RTSP for the majority. Now, why HTTP live streaming? Well, it allows the client to switch between the bit rates. And so MMRender does support HTTP live streaming, and all you have to do is pass in the URL, and the client will take care of everything. So as long as the content is being served in that protocol, it should be done. It should be just taken care of behind the scenes. So how HTTP live streaming works, just a quick overview. The media stream is basically chunked into different files, into different streams, into different components, and every component supports different bit rates. So depending on what's available to the device, you can choose between the components. It also allows encryption over HTTPS. So for every index file, for every chunk of the HTTP live streaming feed, you can also, the server can also pass in the 128 AES encryption keys, so the client can decrypt it. So this is one viable solution for DRM, digital rights management, which will be coming up in the next few slides. Now, digital rights management. So the next few slides, it's mainly to do with content providers. If you're dealing with a studio or a content provider and they need to ensure their content is safe, protected, you might, a lot of the times we get asked by the studios, like, hey, do you support like this protocol, and how do I protect my content? Do you support this DRM solution? So if you're dealing with other business partners, like if other companies are trying to leverage your app development skills in your company or in your project to make a solution for them, this is mainly for that. Right, so it's for content providers and studios. These are the 4 basic options we have right now on our platform. Like I mentioned, with HLS, well, I'll go over all of them separately, so I shouldn't drill too down. So these are basically the 4 options. Now, HLS. So our device, it's non-rooted, and it's impossible for one app to gain access to the protected content of another app. So when the content is being served using HLS, if your app can protect the AES keys, then it's all good. Like, it is a viable choice if you can do that. But the problem is a lot of the content providers are not happy with just this encryption mechanism. They have their other custom DRM solutions that they want to enforce on. Because for many other platforms, it may not be as safe. And if you have a partner or a content provider who want to get more details on our platform security, it can be provided to them. It will probably be under an NDA. And RIM security team can even be part of that discussion if needed, because they know all the answers. And third-party DRM providers. I'll draw there's a slide with some pictures later on which might make sense. But basically, a lot of the times, content providers would get a software kit from another company to manage their content, to protect their content. RIM actually has active engagements with some of these companies, and they will be supporting that software for BlackBerry 10. Now, if your content provider needs to know some of this company, RIM can happily introduce them, or if you prefer other companies that you're working with already and already dealt with for other solutions, RIM can entertain those introductions as well. I put in all the text so that you can look into later on if you need to, but it's not a big deal. But the thing is, if a new company is being approached to provide a DRM solution for a new platform, for example, BlackBerry 10, it could take up to 6 to 9 months. So the sooner they start, the better. Microsoft Play Ready. Right now, our platform doesn't support Microsoft Smooth Streaming Protocol. So because of that, if the content provider does use Microsoft Play Ready, they'd be limited to progressive download protocol. And it would actually be using the keys that are on the device, on the RIM devices. So if anything goes wrong, RIM would be liable. So because of that, there actually needs to be a legal agreement. Lawyers would probably be involved. So again, these are all directed to the big players, the content providers, if you really want to get into the legal gist of it. And there's another option, but this is for the web. There is another platform. There is another session for the web API multimedia. You can learn more about that. Basically, it's a quick, easy way. It's a DRM way to be used with Flash. It can be used with HTTP live streaming, progressive download, etc. But in a Flash, in the context of Flash web API. And if the company already has a web infrastructure in place, it's a quick, easy solution. They don't have to port in new libraries. It just works. All right, so other formats or protocols that are not supported. I tried, many of you may have already seen this picture, like Jamie. But I'll just quickly mention this because we do end up suggesting this to some vendors. So basically, if there's a protocol or format that's not supported in our platform, ideally, this is basically how the picture will look like. So you have a content server, and it's using some different streaming protocol or format. It's a different DRM scheme. And your application gets the content. Now, it has to somehow convert that to either HLS, which is what would be recommended, or some other supported formats. And then, after you have that, you actually have to feed it through the local proxy server. Because right now, MMRender, it doesn't allow you to feed in just raw bytes. So you actually have to pass in like a URI. So what you could do, and this is fast enough, you could just feed the data to the local proxy server, so 127.0.0.1, and then you can just write. So basically, it will be 2 threads, one thread writing to that proxy server, and the other one just reading from it, which is MMRender. And that's where you pass into the Multimedia API. And the trick is, like I was going on and on about the DRM providers, in this part, they often use services from other companies. You may not need to if you don't have to worry about DRM, but content providers, they have to protect their assets, legal lawsuits, whatnot, so they need some confirmation. So they often use software kit, DRM kit, provided by other companies. All right, try to hurry it up. Integration capability. So I'll just mention a few things quickly, which multimedia apps can make use of in BlackBerry 10. So media previewer. In the demo today, in the keynote session today, they did mention something like this. They mentioned the word card. What card is basically an app which you can preview with. We'll get to that soon enough. But if you're just interested in playing a file, or if your app doesn't really have to do all this crazy, or not crazy, if you just want to play a media file, maybe you don't have to make a media player app yourself. You can just leverage the core media player app previewer mode, which is already in the build. And I'll show you how. So you can just invoke the media previewer, or you can register your app to be a previewer itself so that other people can invoke you. All right, now this time I actually got it. All right, I'll switch to actually a dev alpha B. To the HDMI, please. OK. Now, remember, like previously, the first one app I showed play pause That's how the first button would have looked like. It's just an empty play button. And I added a couple of extra buttons to show how this invocation functionality works for the media player. Now, the first one I'll be doing is just invoking the default player. All I'll do is like, hey, invocation framework, open this URI, and I'll figure out what the best previewer is or what the register app is. So it supports orientation mode. So it's actually a video from the BlackBerry Jam in Brazil. So it's actually a full-fledged app.
A receptividade
So I paused it.
está sendo maravilhosa e espero que eles. I'm so excited.
So there's some share options.
O principal objetivo de eu ter usado o Cascade foi
You can save. You can open a media file and actually save it as a different name.
aprender uma tecnologia nova. A gente se surpreender. No
This is
início,
essentially a full-fledged video player app. And what you noticed here, it actually opened it as an app mode. So it basically opened up a different app and and just so that you can view it. And you can actually tilt it the way you want it. Right. And the other option is not to leave the app where you're in right now, so that you can just transition to, oh, I made it. All right, so the other option is just to have a transition effect that they were talking about in the keynote session. So I'll just invoke a specific player. So I'll show the code soon, so you can figure out what I'm referring to here. So you see it just transition. And I can peek back. And you actually have the back button you can't really see here. It's almost the same functionality, but right now
muita gente falando da
the previewer apps are limited to the orientation. You can't really change the orientation if you're already using a previewer. So you probably have to remember that. But whatever happened to the sound? Is the sound there?
Já conhecidas assim.
simplicidade.
So yeah, it just transitioned back. So it's very nice feature if you just wanna have a quick solution for playback. It's very easy to do, and we'll see some code how to do it. Can I get back on my laptop again? All right. Now the first one that I did, I just invoked the URI. So this is the card request, the word card that I was referring to. Again, you can learn all about it from the invocation session. I'll mention it again. All I did, I made a card. I set the URI, and I told the invoke managers, like, hey, open it. So whatever you know, whatever the other apps have registered their MIME types to be, the invocation framework will figure out what to open it with. So this is unbound invocation. I'm not really specifying which app I should be opening this with. That was the first one. But by default, the behavior is defined so that it will actually open it in app mode. And the second button that I pressed was actually the bound invocation. I specifically said open it in the previewer mode. And that's when I saw the functionality, it's just sliding in from the right. The same thing, just one extra line here. Now, if you specifically wanted to open it in the app mode, which is by default anyway, you would have to use this instead. So whichever app you're trying to control, they would have to publish these target IDs for you. That's the trick. All right, so you can also, like this, you can leverage other apps. You can share links and playlists, artist album with other people. BBM, Twitter, or you saw Foursquare. You can do calendar events. So if you're doing a media player app, say if you want it, so the app would smartly figure out when the next show of the user is, and it would make a calendar event for the user. You can do universal search. So if your app actually has content, it would be nice if it could just search on the home screen. It will show me. I was like, hey, so this is the album you're looking for. You're going to the app and search it. And you can also have notification. You can have things on the universal inbox. So imagine a YouTube app and someone I subscribed to, they uploaded a new video. And imagine that app pushed an email in my inbox saying, hey, a new video that you might want to watch. And again, you can leverage other devices. So if you're connected with the second screen via HDMI, you could figure you will get the events back. You would know the dimensions. You can make use of the information. For example, you can redraw your entire UI. So if you have bigger dimensions, why not use it? You don't have to be limited to that small screen anymore. And you can actually communicate with other devices via other protocols, like DLNA, UPnP. There are other open source UPnP libraries that you can use to make use of this. BlackBerry 10 right now doesn't expose any such functionality, but you can port over so that you can communicate between the two devices. Like I can push media from my device to another device, features like that. And it's all about the user experience, so don't forget the UX. There are specific UX guidelines that are posted on our websites. You don't have to specifically follow it. These are just guidelines. Basically telling you which components are meant or designed to be used for which features. For example, I'll mention some here. So for example, whenever you're drilling down a list, the guidelines suggest you use a navigation pane so that the pane slide in from the right. It's a nice animation. It's a nice feature that users get used to seeing from all other apps. So it's very intuitive after a while, and especially if all other apps are using it. If other apps are doing it a different way, it's somewhat odd, but again, maybe you have a better way. But again, it's free stuff that you get without even doing anything, free animation that you get from navigation. And you have some swipe gestures which are very cool. Like for example, if you have drilled down a couple of levels in a navigation pane, you can actually slide down the back button and you can directly go to the topmost level. I'm not sure if that feature is already in R9. I have to confirm, but it will be there. And there are some other things like overflow menu. I'll show the cat pictures there. So if you see the overflow menu on the right, you might be familiar with that already. Whenever there are options, there are a lot of other options like this. The UX guidelines suggest that they go to the overflow menu bar, and that's where it pops up from the right. And you have context menu, which I'll actually show in a bit through someone else's app. Now, I wanted to quickly introduce Jamie Julius here. So he's actually the chief architect from Nobex Technologies, and he's allowing me to show off his app, which they made with Cascades and QML. And yeah, so previously the last one for BlackBerry, I believe it was made in Air Technologies, with Air, right? For Playbook, it was made in Air, and they rewrote the app. And it's just a beta, and it's already in the app world, Dev Alpha app world, so you can actually download it. Now, can I please get the HDMI? Hopefully the network will work. It's always, all right, so while it's loading. So what I was referring to about navigation pane, so you see the free animation you're getting, and it's using the tab components here to swing between things. And you have the swipe down to go to the system menu. Again, these are things that you get for free. Things are coming up from the right again. And let me just quickly show you some stuff about the context menu if I can find it. I'm not sure if this will play. Again, risk with live demo. I played. Awesome. So, context menu. So if you click on it, things pop up from the right. You can see it here. You can share it on Twitter. You can do other things with it. It's figuring out the artist information.
And the mama was a hippie. In Alabama, she was swinging a hammer. Price you gotta pay when you break the panorama. She never knew that there was anything more.
Right. So Jamie is actually a great expert in his domain. So he will actually be around. So if you want to ask him questions, he's a great guy to get in touch with. And thanks again, Jamie, for showing this, or allowing me to show this. And I think I just have one slide left. Again, too late. All right, just some ending thoughts. for any new platform or any new programming language I try to tackle on, I just dig directly into the IDE and sample apps. For me, the quickest way to learn to actually see something work, because after you already know one language properly, like a one core language properly like C, C++, it's very easy to pick up other languages or other API. For me, personally, it's just very easy to dig directly to sample apps and then looking up documentation as I need to. And there are enough sample apps. I can't stress that enough. Most of the stuff here today will go out public, like the annoying rock music noise app, or the video player app is already public. And the bare bones, the invocation thing, I'll make that public as well. And some other relevant sessions that you might want to look out for if you're interested. There's one for native API camera. I believe Sean McVeigh is doing that one. He helps out the public developers a lot. And there's also another one for the web API for multimedia. I believe it's being done by Dave Baumer. And invocation framework. So there are lots of subtleties in invocation framework that you have to know. It's in the big picture, it's very simple and intuitive, but there are small things that you might want to know. Shadid Hawk is doing that. Some of you might know that, and I would suggest that. BBM API. So if you wanna use the BBM API to make use, to share things from Multimedia API, which I think all apps should do. Well, like, why not go viral if you have the user base? And the PIM API. There's a session for that. There are also Ask the Expert sessions you can drop in. So roundtables, there's one, I'm supposed to go in 5 minutes right now, and there's another one in Thursday. And people can actually request time with speakers one-on-one. So I think I still have 2 sessions left, not just on Wednesday. So it's in the meals room. There's like a big table with some pictures of the speakers where people can sign in. So like 15-minute slots, like one-on-one sessions, if you really want to drill me with questions. And yeah, in roundtables, all the speakers will be gathered around, and you can ask whatever you want. And I'll take a few questions if you. Sorry. Yeah.
So the current video playback sample looked like it had a couple of kludges around limitations in the APIs where QML would have to call into C++ for some utility function and back. And I'm wondering if the latest beta makes integrating the video player component a little cleaner.
Are you referring to like calling some screen API calls?
I think it may have been, yeah.
Right. So the screen API. So in R6, in beta 2, the sample I uploaded, there were only two calls, C API calls or C++ API calls I had to make from QML. One was the fact that I had to figure out the absolute path, because it's a limitation still. And the other one, there was a bug in the foreign window object.
Yeah, I think that's the one I'm thinking.
Right. So the foreign window object bug is fixed. So you shouldn't have to do that one. That was a tricky one. That's why I tried to document it. I was like, hey, you shouldn't need to do it. It's a bug. But the other one is, like, I'll get to that, but I think he had a question. Sorry, go on.
Can I record audio?
Yes. So, but you mean from your own playback?
From the device, using the micro and record and...
With microphone, yes, you can. Like I mentioned a class, I guess I didn't go over too much details. But it's very limited from the Qt API. It's just audio recorder. Basically, you said, hey, start recording from the microphone. And you specify the formats. I believe it supports M4A and maybe some other format. It just records, yeah. It's very easy to use for if you're just thinking of recording audio from the microphone. And in the C layer API, there are some more things that you can do. Sorry, go on.
Yes, what containers are supported, like MKB, WebM? What kind of containers are officially going to be supported?
Right. So the list I gave, I believe that is the absolute list. But there are more details. Like for every container, you can see the associated codecs which is supported and the profiles. It should be in the documentation sites live already. I forgot to specify the website. It's developer.blackberry.com. If people come by later on, I can show in the website. All right. I think I should call it because it is getting late. So thank you for all coming, and drop by whenever you want. All right. Cool. Thanks.